Hey man, one of the clearest signs isn't what she says, it's how carefully she doesn't say certain things. When attachment starts forming, but fear is still louder than desire, restraint shows up everywhere. She watches herself. She edits her words mid-sentence. She pulls back just after leaning in, not because she doesn't feel something, but because she feels too much and doesn't trust where it might lead. That hesitation isn't indifference, it's internal conflict. You'll notice it in her behavior more than her communication. She stays present without fully committing. She checks in without making it obvious. She wants proximity, but resists dependency. This push and pull isn't manipulation, it's self-protection. Her mind is trying to keep control while her emotions are already stepping forward, and that tension leaks out in small, inconsistent ways. Another sign is how she reacts when your attention shifts elsewhere. She won't confront it directly, but her energy changes. She becomes quieter, sharper, or suddenly more curious, not possessive, alert. Because when someone is emotionally invested but afraid to admit it, they monitor threat without claiming territory. She doesn't want to seem needy, yet she doesn't want to feel replaceable either. Relatable truth. When attachment exists but fear dominates, she'll test distance without wanting separation. She'll pull back slightly to see if you chase, not because she needs validation, but because she needs reassurance without asking for it. If you collapse into pursuit, she feels overwhelmed. If you disappear completely, she feels exposed. That's the tightrope she's walking internally. You'll also notice she remembers details she pretends not to care about, things you mentioned casually, small preferences, offhand comments. She stores information quietly because it makes her feel connected, yet she doesn't want you to notice how much space you already occupy in her mind. Memory is one of the strongest indicators of emotional investment, especially when it's understated. Another sign is how she opens up indirectly. She won't declare vulnerability outright, but she'll reference it sideways. Stories about past experiences, frustrations disguised as humor, truths softened with distance. This isn't avoidance, it's pacing. She's measuring how safe it feels to reveal herself without risking too much too fast. Men often misread this phase because it doesn't look dramatic. There's no confession, no overt claim. But attachment doesn't always announce itself. It settles in quietly. It shows up in consistency rather than intensity. In how she stays, not how loudly she expresses. In how she reacts when things slow down, not when they're exciting. What's interesting is how she responds to your composure. If you remain steady, neither chasing nor withdrawing, her fear softens over time. Because calm behavior signals safety. Safety allows attachment to surface without pressure. But if you rush to define things or demand clarity, her fear takes control again. And fear always silences what attachment wants to express. Another subtle indicator is how she frames the future, carefully, not in promises, but in assumptions, small references that include you without labeling anything, a we that slips out accidentally, a pause when discussing plans that suddenly feel shared. These moments are unintentional. They're leaks from a place she hasn't fully allowed herself to acknowledge yet. The key thing to understand is this: when someone is attached but afraid, they don't need persuasion, they need safety, not reassurance, not pressure. Safety created by consistency, restraint, and emotional steadiness. When you don't force clarity, clarity emerges on its own. And when fear no longer feels necessary, attachment stops hiding. One of the strongest indicators shows up in how carefully she manages her emotional exposure. She won't disappear, but she won't fully lean in either. She stays close enough to feel connected, yet far enough to feel protected. This balance isn't calculated, it's instinctive. She's trying to enjoy what's forming without giving it the power to hurt her. That's why her behavior can feel confusing if you're expecting certainty, but completely consistent if you're paying attention to patterns instead of words. You'll notice she becomes more observant than expressive. She watches how you react to small things, how you handle silence, how you respond when plans change, how steady you remain when the dynamic isn't perfect. These aren't random moments to her, they're checkpoints. She's assessing whether her feelings are safe in your hands before she ever admits they exist. Relatable truth. When attachment is present but fear is stronger, she'll avoid moments that force emotional definition. Conversations about where this is going make her uncomfortable, not because she doesn't care, but because caring feels risky. She'd rather let things unfold naturally than say something she can't emotionally walk back later. So she delays clarity, hoping time will answer questions she's not ready to ask out loud. Another sign appears when you pull back slightly, Not to test her, but because life happens. Instead of losing interest, she becomes more aware. She might subtly increase effort, initiate more often, or seek reassurance indirectly, not through confrontation, but through presence. Because losing access feels threatening when attachment has already taken root, even if she hasn't acknowledged it consciously. You'll also notice contradictions in her behavior. She might downplay the connection verbally while protecting it behaviorally. She'll say she's not sure what she wants, yet make choices that keep you close. This contradiction isn't manipulation, it's emotional lag. Her feelings are ahead of her willingness to accept them, and that lag creates tension she hasn't resolved yet. Men often misinterpret this phase as disinterest because it lacks overt enthusiasm, but what's actually happening is internal restraint. She's containing emotion rather than expressing it. Containment feels quiet from the outside, but it takes energy, and people don't expend emotional energy on things that don't matter to them. Another subtle indicator is how she reacts to your emotional steadiness. When you don't rush her, don't corner her, and don't demand validation, she relaxes. That relaxation allows more of her natural affection to surface. Fear thrives under pressure. Attachment grows in calm. The more composed you are, the less she feels the need to protect herself. Relatable moment. She shares pieces of her inner world, but quickly pulls back if it feels too exposed. She might joke right after saying something vulnerable, or change the subject abruptly. That retreat isn't rejection, it's self-regulation. She revealed something real, and then instinctively covered it to regain control. You'll also notice she's more affected by your absence than she admits, not in dramatic ways, but in subtle shifts. Her tone changes, her timing changes, her engagement adjusts. She doesn't announce missing you, but her behavior fills the gap. Behavior always speaks louder when words are restrained. By now the pattern becomes clear. Attachment doesn't always look like pursuit. Sometimes it looks like caution, sometimes it looks like hesitation, sometimes it looks like consistency, without declaration. When fear and emotion coexist, expression is delayed, but investment is already present, and the more patient and grounded you remain, the safer it becomes for that attachment to finally step into the open. What finally begins to shift things isn't pressure or reassurance, it's time combined with consistency. When she sees that your behavior doesn't spike when things feel good and doesn't collapse when they don't, something inside her loosens. Fear survives on unpredictability. The moment unpredictability disappears, fear loses leverage. She starts realizing that the connection isn't fragile, and once that realization settles, restraint slowly gives way to expression. You'll notice this shift, not through declarations, but through comfort. She stops guarding every response. Her humor becomes less defensive. Her pauses feel natural instead of calculated. She doesn't feel the need to constantly recalibrate how much she's giving. Comfort is the first real signal that attachment no longer feels dangerous to her nervous system. Relatable truth. Many women don't hide feelings because they want power. They hide them because they don't want vulnerability to outpace trust. Once trust catches up, emotion stops feeling like a liability. That's why forcing emotional clarity too early backfires. You're asking her to cross a bridge before she knows it can hold her. Another moment you'll recognize is when she stops testing your availability. Early on, she might create small gaps just to see if you rush to fill them. When attachment stabilizes, those tests fade, not because she doesn't care anymore, but because she no longer needs reassurance, disguised as distance. Stability removes the need for testing. You'll also see her integrate you into her emotional routines, not publicly, not dramatically, but personally. She reaches out during unremarkable moments. She shares thoughts that aren't curated. She doesn't feel the need to impress you emotionally. That shift from performance to presence is a strong indicator that attachment has moved from guarded to genuine. Men often miss this stage because it doesn't feel exciting. There's less tension, less uncertainty, less push and pull, but what replaces it is far more meaningful: ease. Ease doesn't stimulate anxiety, so it's easy to overlook. Yet ease is where real connection actually lives. Another sign is how she responds to your boundaries. When she's emotionally invested, she respects your pace, even if it challenges her. She doesn't try to control your availability, she adjusts. Adjustment is a form of care. People don't adjust for something they don't value. Relatable moment. She starts speaking more freely about herself, without filtering for outcome. Not to impress, not to protect, just to share. That unfiltered sharing only happens when she feels emotionally safe. Safety doesn't come from reassurance, it comes from reliability over time. You'll also notice she becomes less concerned with labels, not because she doesn't want direction, but because she already feels anchored. When attachment feels real, the need to define it decreases. Definition becomes a formality instead of a necessity. By this point, it's clear that what was once hidden wasn't absent, it was waiting for stability, waiting for consistency, waiting for proof that expression wouldn't cost her control. And when that proof is delivered quietly, without force, attachment stops hiding. It doesn't rush out, it simply settles into place. One of the most common mistakes men make at this stage is mistaking caution for lack of interest. When her expression is measured, they assume something is missing and try to compensate with intensity. More attention, more questions, more reassurance, but intensity applied to someone who's already emotionally invested but fearful doesn't feel loving. It feels invasive. It accelerates pressure before safety has fully settled, and pressure is exactly what fear reacts against. Another way men sabotage this dynamic is by demanding emotional transparency on a timeline that isn't mutual. They want clarity because they feel uncertain, not because the moment naturally calls for it. When clarity is demanded instead of invited, it forces her to choose between honesty and self-protection, and when those two conflict, self-protection always wins. Relatable truth. When someone is attached but guarded, they're hypersensitive to shifts in tone and behavior. If you become inconsistent, warm one day, distant the next, it reactivates fear instantly. Not because they're fragile, but because inconsistency signals instability. Stability is what allows hidden feelings to surface. Without it, expression retreats back underground. Men also misread delayed vulnerability as manipulation. They assume she's withholding on purpose, but withholding often isn't strategic, it's subconscious. She's regulating her exposure, not controlling the situation. When you interpret restraint as a tactic instead of a boundary, you respond defensively instead of patiently, and defensiveness creates emotional distance where closeness was forming. Another common error is over-validating emotions prematurely. Men think reassurance will calm fear, but too much reassurance before trust solidifies actually increases anxiety. It creates a sense of obligation to respond emotionally before she's ready. Obligation doesn't feel safe, it feels heavy, and heavy emotions don't invite openness. What she's actually watching for is not how much you say, but how well you hold yourself when things are unclear. Can you remain present without pushing? Can you stay steady without needing guarantees? Can you tolerate ambiguity without becoming reactive? Those answers matter more to her nervous system than any promise ever could. Relatable moment. When a man starts pulling away out of frustration instead of patience, she doesn't feel relief. She feels confirmed in her fear. Not because she wanted control, but because the withdrawal feels like punishment for not moving faster. That reinforces her instinct to stay guarded rather than open up. Men often believe the solution is either to chase harder or detach completely. But the middle path, consistent presence without pressure, is what actually allows attachment to emerge safely. Extremes feel familiar, balance feels new, and new takes time to trust. Another subtle misstep is interpreting her independence as emotional distance. When she maintains her routines, her space, her autonomy, it doesn't mean she's uninvested, it means she's protecting what makes her feel grounded. When you respect that instead of challenging it, you become part of her stability rather than a threat to it. By now the pattern is clear. What pushes attached but fearful women away isn't lack of effort, it's misaligned effort. Too much too soon, too many questions without enough calm, too much urgency without enough consistency. When effort aligns with patience, fear relaxes, and when fear relaxes, attachment no longer needs to hide. The most effective response at this stage isn't action, it's restraint, paired with consistency. You don't pull closer, and you don't drift away. You stay exactly where you are. That steadiness does something powerful. It removes urgency from the equation. When urgency disappears, fear loses its grip. She no longer feels rushed to decide, explain, or defend herself emotionally. And in that absence of pressure, attachment starts feeling like a choice instead of a risk. You'll notice that when you stop trying to handle her emotions, she becomes more comfortable sharing them. Not all at once, not dramatically, but gradually. She'll reveal thoughts without framing them defensively. She'll speak without immediately softening her words. This happens because she senses that you're not trying to manage the outcome. You're simply present. Presence without agenda feels safe to someone who's been guarding their inner world. Relatable truth. The fastest way to shut down unexpressed attachment is to overinterpret it. When you analyze every gesture, every pause, every tone shift, you bring attention to something she's trying to regulate quietly. That spotlight makes her self-conscious. Self-consciousness revives fear. Letting moments pass without commentary allows them to deepen instead of retreat. Another important shift happens when you stop reacting emotionally to her pullbacks. You don't question them. You don't confront them. You don't treat them as problems to solve. You let them exist without attaching meaning. That non-reaction communicates confidence. Confidence tells her nervous system that she won't be punished for needing space, and that reassurance makes it easier for her to come closer voluntarily. Men often underestimate how much emotional safety is built through predictability of behavior, not predictability in availability, but predictability in character. When she knows you won't change who you are based on her pace, she stops feeling responsible for managing your emotions. And when that responsibility lifts, attachment can surface without guilt. You'll also notice her emotional timing start to align with yours. She no longer waits for the perfect moment to share something personal. She brings it up naturally. That timing shift is subtle but important. It shows she's no longer bracing herself before opening up. She trusts that whatever she reveals won't destabilize the connection. Relatable moment. When you stop asking for reassurance, you start receiving it in quieter ways. Not through declarations, but through consistency. Through how she stays engaged during mundane moments. Through how she checks in without prompting. Through how she makes space for you in her life without announcing it. These are the signals that attachment has moved from guarded to grounded. Another thing you'll notice is how she becomes more emotionally flexible. Early on, fear makes her rigid, careful with words, careful with timing, careful with exposure. As safety grows, rigidity softens. She laughs more freely. She expresses frustration without apology. She allows herself to be imperfect around you. Imperfection is one of the clearest signs that attachment feels secure. Men often think they need to unlock attachment with the right move, but attachment doesn't unlock. It emerges. It emerges when fear is no longer needed as protection, and fear only dissolves when it's met with calm consistency instead of pressure or unpredictability. By this stage, it becomes clear that what was hidden wasn't weakness, it was caution. She wasn't withholding because she lacked feeling. She was waiting to see whether expression would cost her safety. When safety becomes undeniable, attachment no longer hides. It doesn't rush out, it settles in quietly, naturally, and without resistance. When the emotional bond finally stabilizes, something subtle but permanent shifts in her behavior. She no longer feels the need to guard every interaction, not because she suddenly feels fearless, but because the connection has proven it can exist without volatility. At this point, she's not testing you anymore. She's observing how things feel when nothing is being tested. And that quiet observation is far more revealing than any earlier push and pull. You'll notice she stops managing impressions. Early on, she might have been careful about how she appeared. Strong, independent, unbothered. Once she feels secure internally, that performance fades. She becomes more honest about being tired, unsure, or emotionally off. This isn't weakness, it's comfort. People only stop performing when they believe they won't be rejected for being real. Relatable truth. When attachment solidifies, she doesn't suddenly become more dramatic or expressive. She becomes simpler. Conversations lose edge. Interactions feel natural, instead of charged. There's less need to read between the lines because the lines themselves become clearer. This is often mistaken for boredom by men who confuse chaos with passion, but in reality, it's emotional grounding. Another noticeable shift is how she handles disagreement. Instead of withdrawing or deflecting, she stays present. She doesn't feel the need to win emotional ground anymore. That's because the connection no longer feels fragile. Disagreement doesn't threaten it. And when conflict stops feeling dangerous, communication becomes honest instead of strategic. At this stage, her investment shows up in choices rather than words. She prioritizes time without making it a declaration. She includes you without making it an announcement. She adjusts her life rhythm subtly, not because she's trying to please you, but because you've become part of her internal landscape. People don't rearrange their inner world for something that doesn't matter. Men often expect a moment of emotional clarity, a confession, a turning point, a label. But real attachment doesn't arrive with ceremony. It settles, it integrates, it becomes visible in the absence of tension rather than the presence of intensity. That's why many men miss it entirely. They're waiting for fireworks when what actually arrives is calm. Relatable moment. She no longer checks how much you care by pulling away. She no longer seeks reassurance through distance. The need to regulate closeness disappears once closeness feels stable. That's when interaction becomes effortless instead of calculated. Effortlessness is not lack of care, it's evidence of trust. Another important detail is how she responds to your independence. When attachment is secure, she doesn't feel threatened by your focus on your own life. She respects it. She understands that your sense of direction doesn't compete with connection, it strengthens it. Secure attachment doesn't demand constant attention, it appreciates presence when it happens. This is where many men unintentionally sabotage things by trying to lock it in. They push for certainty because they finally feel safe, but safety thrives in freedom, not control. When you continue showing up without tightening your grip, you allow the connection to deepen organically instead of turning rigid. By now it becomes obvious that what she was protecting herself from wasn't you, it was loss of control, loss of self, loss of emotional balance. When she sees that closeness with you doesn't cost her those things, attachment no longer feels dangerous, it feels natural, and natural bonds don't announce themselves, they simply remain. Once attachment is fully present beneath the surface, her fear no longer shows up as distance, it shows up as restraint. She doesn't want to disrupt what feels stable by moving too fast, saying too much, or revealing everything at once, so she chooses control over expression. That control isn't coldness, it's careful preservation. She's trying not to scare herself out of something that finally feels safe. You'll notice she starts aligning emotionally before she aligns verbally. Her actions become more synchronized with yours. She responds more intuitively. She anticipates instead of reacts. This isn't coincidence, it's internal integration. When someone is emotionally invested, they start moving in rhythm without needing to plan it. Rhythm is one of the clearest signs of unspoken attachment. Relatable truth. Many men expect attachment to feel intense, but when it's genuine, it often feels quiet. Quiet doesn't mean empty, it means settled. The nervous system isn't on high alert anymore. There's less second guessing, less emotional whiplash, less internal negotiation, and because it's calm, it can be mistaken for indifference by those who equate drama with desire. Another sign appears in how she handles uncertainty. Instead of needing constant reassurance, she tolerates not knowing everything. She doesn't rush to define the future because she trusts the present. That tolerance only exists when emotional security has already formed. People don't relax into uncertainty unless they feel grounded. Men often miss this shift because they're still waiting for proof through words, but proof shows up through behavior that doesn't demand acknowledgement. She stays consistent without asking to be noticed for it. She supports without announcing it. She cares without bargaining. That quiet investment speaks louder than any declaration ever could. What's important here is how you respond. Not by escalating closeness, not by pulling back, but by maintaining your own center. When you don't treat her attachment like something fragile that needs to be handled delicately, she relaxes even more. Overhandling creates pressure. Normalizing connection creates safety. Relatable moment. She starts sharing her inner world without preamble. Not heavy confessions, just honest thoughts. She no longer wraps everything in humor or distance. She trusts that you can hear her without changing how you see her. That trust only forms when attachment feels secure enough to risk being ordinary. Another indicator is how she reacts when you're not at your best. Early on, fear makes her retreat at the first sign of imperfection. Once attachment deepens, she stays. She doesn't need you to be impressive all the time. She needs you to be real. Staying during imperfection is a powerful sign that emotional grounding has taken place. Men sometimes misinterpret this stage as a plateau and try to reignite excitement artificially. But excitement isn't what's missing. Tension is. And tension doesn't need to be recreated when connection is healthy. Stability doesn't kill desire, it allows it to exist without anxiety. By this point, the picture is complete. What was once hidden is now integrated. She's no longer fighting her feelings or guarding against them, she's living alongside them. And when attachment reaches that stage, it doesn't ask for permission to exist. It simply becomes part of how she moves, responds, and chooses. At this stage, the biggest shift happens inside you, not her. You stop watching her behavior with anxiety and start observing it with clarity. You're no longer trying to decode every move for reassurance. You see patterns without attaching your self-worth to them. That internal calm changes the entire dynamic because she can sense when a man is no longer emotionally dependent on outcomes, and paradoxically, that's when emotional closeness feels safest to grow. she becomes more emotionally honest when she realizes you're not going anywhere just because things aren't perfect. Not clinging, not chasing, just grounded. Grounded men don't create emotional urgency, and urgency is what feeds fear. When urgency disappears, she doesn't feel like she has to manage you. She can simply be. Relatable truth. Many women hide attachment because they've learned that closeness often leads to loss of autonomy. When she sees that closeness with you doesn't cost her independence, she stops guarding her feelings. Not all at once, but steadily, naturally, without forcing herself to open up faster than she's ready. Another shift shows up in how she responds to silence. Earlier, silence may have felt charged or uncomfortable. Now, it feels neutral, safe. There's no panic underneath it, no assumption that distance means danger. When silence stops being threatening, it means trust has replaced fear at the foundation. Men often think leadership in relationships means steering conversations or defining direction. But at this level, leadership looks like emotional steadiness. You don't react impulsively, you don't escalate unnecessarily, you don't withdraw to regain control. You stay consistent, and consistency becomes the container that allows attachment to remain visible instead of hidden. Relatable moment. She starts sharing future-oriented thoughts casually, without making them declarations, not plans, not promises, just thoughts. And that casualness is important. It means she's no longer protecting herself from imagining continuity. Her mind is allowing you to exist beyond the present moment, and that only happens when attachment feels secure. This is where many men unknowingly disrupt things by trying to secure the connection. They sense closeness and rush to solidify it. But emotional security doesn't grow through tightening, it grows through allowance. When you allow the connection to breathe, it deepens. When you restrict it with expectations, it stiffens. You'll notice she becomes more receptive to your leadership, not because she's submissive, but because she trusts your direction. Trust doesn't come from dominance, it comes from reliability. From knowing you won't destabilize emotionally when things feel uncertain, from knowing you can hold your ground without needing to control hers. By now, the emotional bond isn't fragile, it's quiet and rooted. It doesn't demand attention, it doesn't need validation, it simply exists, and that's the part most men miss. Real attachment doesn't announce itself, it integrates. It becomes part of daily life rather than the center of it. This is the final truth. When a woman is attached but afraid, your job isn't to pull it out of her, it's to become the kind of man it no longer needs to hide from. When you stay grounded, self-directed, and emotionally composed, fear loses its purpose. And when fear has no purpose, attachment no longer stays hidden, it stays Barat. There comes a point where you realize the connection doesn't need constant supervision. You're no longer checking emotional temperature or wondering where you stand. You understand that what's real doesn't require monitoring, and that realization changes how you show up. You become less reactive, less eager to correct, less concerned with timing every move. You trust what you see over what you fear, and that trust in yourself becomes the strongest signal of all. She feels this shift immediately, even if she can't articulate it. When a man stops hovering emotionally, the atmosphere changes. There's more ease, more room to breathe, less pressure to perform or protect. That space is what allows her feelings to exist without resistance. Not because you demanded openness, but because you no longer needed it to feel secure. Relatable truth. People reveal themselves fully only when they sense they won't be chased, corrected, or controlled for being honest. When you stop trying to manage outcomes, honesty stops feeling dangerous. That's when she starts showing up without rehearsing who she needs to be to keep things stable. Another thing you'll notice is that she no longer fears your absence the way she once did, not because she cares less, but because she trusts continuity. Trust removes urgency. Urgency is what creates anxiety. When anxiety fades, attachment doesn't cling, it settles. Men often underestimate how much power lies in emotional self-sufficiency. When your sense of direction doesn't depend on her validation, the dynamic stabilizes naturally. You don't need her reactions to feel confident. You don't need reassurance to feel chosen. And paradoxically, that independence makes closeness feel safer rather than threatening. Relatable moment. She starts meeting you where you are instead of pulling you toward where she feels comfortable. Not forcefully, organically. Alignment replaces negotiation. That shift doesn't happen because you convinced her. It happens because you remain steady long enough for alignment to feel natural. This is where most men finally understand that emotional leadership isn't about intensity or dominance, it's about containment. you contain your reactions, you contain your expectations, you contain your impulses, and in that containment, you create an environment where emotional truth can exist without chaos. Another important sign is how she responds to your silence, not with panic, not with suspicion, but with trust. Silence becomes neutral instead of loaded. Neutral silence only exists when emotional safety has taken root. It means she no longer feels like she has to read between every pause. At this stage, attachment isn't something you worry about losing. It's something you respect enough not to interfere with. You don't overhandle it. You don't test it. You let it exist. And that restraint keeps it alive longer than any attempt to secure it ever could. The final realization is simple but heavy. What people hide isn't always absence, it's caution. And caution dissolves when it's met with calm consistency instead of pressure. When you understand that, you stop trying to extract emotions and start becoming someone emotions feel safe around. And that's when connection stops hiding and starts staying.